in this webinar. So thank you to everyone who has joined so far. As you are entering as an attendee, please feel free to head over to the chat section, select panelists and attendees, and let us know where are you joining us from. We already have some people joining us from Wisconsin, from Los Angeles, from Sydney. So it's great to see that this is a global discussion, even though we're going to have 4 Australians talking about this. So one of the great things about the Culture First Global community is that we get to facilitate these conversations. And while we host them in different parts of the world virtually, anyone can join. And we always try to make sure that our topics resonate with different people from around the world. So great to see all these people joining. For those who have just joined, please feel free to head over to the chat, say hello, let us know where you are joining us from. We have people from all around the world, which is amazing. So I want to be conscious of everyone's time, and I'm gonna kick things off. And we're here today to ask this simple but complex question. Are you ready to talk about mental health at work? So by signing up for today's event, you're going to be tuning in, and we want you to be part of this conversation. And the key themes that we're going to be discussing, what it means to normalize mental health in the workplace, how we can all build a safe environment for open communication to help increase early detection and prevention of mental health conditions. We're going to discuss the value of gratitude in supporting mental health. And we're also going to be discussing mental health at 3 different levels: the organization, the team, and the individual level, and what we can do at each of those different levels to actually create a more mentally healthy workplace. So thank you to all those who are joining. Please feel free to head over to the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. So for those who have just joined, my name is Damon Klotz. I'm Culture Amp's work culture evangelist. And if you are not familiar with my face, but familiar with my voice, it might be because you listen to the Culture First podcast. So I've been with Culture Amp for nearly 6 years now. And as a Australian based in California, I'm very excited to be having this conversation with Dr. Kim, with Olivia and Andrew to be talking about mental health in the workplace. So for those who don't know Culture Amp, we are the world's leading people and culture platform where we help companies measure things like employee engagement, diversity and inclusion, performance, and the entire employee experience. If you want to learn more about Culture Amp, you can obviously head over to cultureamp.com. But today we really want you to be here and focus on this conversation about mental health in the workplace. So that's a little bit about Culture Amp. We've actually partnered with the United Project. So I might pass over to you, Andrew. For those who are joining and haven't heard of the United Project, would you mind just sharing a little bit about the company and the work that they do?
I will, Damon. But before I do that, I'm going to ask you, how are you feeling today?
I have nervous butterflies of excitement. That's how I'm feeling right now.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So the United Project, we're a charitable foundation that exists for 2 main reasons, and that's to prevent suicides and to improve mental health outcomes. And I guess our major focus is on the workplace and how we can have early detection and prevention there. And I guess at our heart, or that purpose is very much around how can we normalise mental health through conversations? So how do we see it in the same way that we see physical health, and by increasing the focus on conversations so that we can deal with it in the workplace.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, one of my little sayings in life is that we're all one conversation away from changing the rest of our life. And I always see conversations as a unit of change to actually have a positive impact. And that's what I've tried to do through the Culture First podcast and also just every interaction we have with each other as humans. So obviously we are talking about mental health in the workplace. So one thing that we do want to let everyone know that if any of the topics or the things that we discussed today that you find triggering for some reason, or if it feels like you want to seek support after this, we're going to post some links into the chat now where you can find support. Obviously in Australia, there's places like Lifeline and the Suicide Callback Service. And then in the United States, we'll also be posting some links there. So we're also joining conversation by Dr. Kim and Olivia. So I want to start to learn a little bit more about everyone who's on this call and joining us today as we post those links. So I'll start with you, Dr. Kim. I would love to maybe start with how you describe yourself in a sentence to the outside world, let's say on like LinkedIn, and then I'll ask the more pressing question.
Okay, thanks, Damon. I'm Dr. Kim Haslock. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, which means my specialisation is in the brain and how it works. And so I use that knowledge of the workings of the brain to help people understand their thoughts and their emotions better, to be better at dealing with things that stress us in our day-to-day lives, and to be able to talk with people in our lives in a healthy and positive way.
Now, the more pressing question, which is going to be a bit of a spoiler alert for how the rest of this is going to go, but if a very curious 10-year-old walks up to you and says, "Excuse me, Dr. Kim, what do you do for work?" How do you answer?
Well, pretty much the same way as I would try and explain it to my kids who are 7 and 12. So what Mummy does is that she talks to people and she helps them understand what their emotions are, how to label them, how to put a name to them, and then to be able to use that to, when we recognize when we're not feeling good in ourselves, and also when we are feeling good, and how we can then use that knowledge to help calm us when particularly things come up in our lives. I know my 12-year-old son, even last night, couldn't sleep. And a lot of his thoughts were around, oh, I'm not going to be able to function well tomorrow, or I'm going to fail the test. So getting him to recognise that those unhealthy thoughts are not really helping him, and what he can do to change the thoughts. Luckily, my 7-year-old's really good at being able to do that. And she just told him to just think of something else. You'll be fine.
Oh, kids these days. I think I feel very glad that I grew up when I did, but kids are so attuned. Like, I've got a 17-year-old brother, and yeah, he's been 17 going on 70 for the past 7 years. He knows way too much, but very attuned to his emotions. So Olivia, a curious 10-year-old walks up to you. How do you describe what you do?
It's a tricky one because I do wear a lot of different hats. So it depends on, I guess, which hat I'm talking about. But when it comes to mental health, I would say that I help to encourage other people to talk about their stories by sharing my stories. I guess it really is as simple as that. But yeah, I do work as a speech pathologist as well, and an artist, and do a bit of modeling. So I suppose it's not that different to what I'd say to an adult. But I get my photo taken a lot, I suppose, and then help people to communicate, and I paint pictures.
That sounds like a pretty good life to me. So we're excited to have you join this conversation.
Thank
and
you.
then Andrew, outside of your work as a coach, a consultant, and at the United Project, a 10-year-old walks up to you, maybe at the Qantas Club, they're a bit lost, and they say, "Excuse me, what do you do for work?"
It's a good question. I don't think I beat the Qantas Club much these days. I guess the way I tell people is that I help individuals and teams make progress on change that really matters to them. And if something's important, then I'll help you think, engage, and act differently to do that. So, and whether that's a 10-year-old or whether that's someone who's 80 and everyone in between, it's the same sort of process.
Awesome. So we're here to obviously have a conversation about mental health and about mental health in the workplace. So I guess the first question I have to ask all of you is, are you all ready to talk about mental health at work?
Definitely.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
So I would also like to know how this question resonates for everyone who's joining us live. So if you are joining us live, I've just posted a link actually to a LinkedIn update that I did yesterday. And I asked this question to all of my followers. I said, are you ready to talk about mental health at work? And the discussion and the conversation has been really fascinating. As of right now, before all of you jump on, 70% of people have said yes, they feel comfortable talking about mental health in the workplace, but 30% have said no. And, the reasons why people have sort of said no is, it depends on who they're talking to. It depends on, the context about it. Are they talking generally about mental health, or are they talking about their own? And I think this is why having conversations and platforms like this is so important, because there's so many layers to this, yet it's only increasing in importance. So we're going to dive in because we want to make sure that everyone leaves here with some sort of actionable takeaways about mental health in the workplace, and also learn from the experiences that, that we've all had here. And like I said, I do want this to be actionable. We are going to have a conversation, but, at some stage in this hour, we are going to talk about some high level concepts and organizational strategies, or things like HR policy. And that's all well and good to create systemic change that I think we need. But I think it's also really important to remember that this is a human conversation. And when we talk about these policies and changes, we do so because they actually impact people. And, we're all people and we all have our own experience. So to start with that, I think, it's really important to set the container for this conversation with a human story. So I'd love to start with you, Olivia, and talk about, as a mental health advocate, as someone who is an ambassador with the United Project, what was it like for you to, I guess, talk publicly about your own mental health conditions for the first time?
It was definitely daunting, but it was also really empowering. And I feel like, in a way, it has helped to keep me accountable. So for those who don't know, when I was about 19, I had a real struggle with mental health. I think it had been sort of developing over my childhood, but it sort of came to a head when I was 19. I started my degree as a speech pathologist. I was studying my first year, and I think that's always a big time for change. So there was a lot going on there. It was a really challenging degree. I was also trying to work part-time and balance all of the things that a young person is trying to balance. But on top of that, I started modeling, and the agency told me to lose weight. And that is where my eating disorder developed. And it all sort of spiraled quite quickly. I ended up with severe anxiety and depression and the eating disorder, which then continued on for about 6 years after that. And it was a really, really hard time. And at the time, I didn't tell anybody what I was going through. I was very good at hiding it until it all did come to a head one day. And I told my mum, and I did reach out for some support. But even still, I kept my eating disorder a secret for years to come. And I really regret that. That is one of my only regrets in my life, is not talking about it sooner, because I think I could have saved myself a lot of anguish and pain on my own if I had spoken about it sooner. So that is why I decided to talk about it openly and publicly, and to continue to do that every single day, because I think if I can encourage one person to reach out sooner than I did, then yeah, that would be an amazing result. Because there was a really dark time for me, and I was suicidal. I couldn't see a way out. But I'm really glad that I did reach out for support, and I think by talking about it, it does encourage others to do the same.
It takes so much courage to have that conversation with yourself first before you're even ready to talk about it to someone else. And Definitely. I think so many people just get it a bit to admit to yourself that I need help is one of the hardest conversations we can ever have with ourselves, but then to actually reach out and ask for help and get it. So what was that process like to actually go from acknowledging it for you and then asking for help, and then because a lot of people ask for help, especially in the workplace, and they don't get it. So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky that my mum has had her own experience with depression. So I think she was very empathetic and understanding. And she took me to a great doctor, and I got some really good support. But I do know a lot of people who have spoken to me, reached out to me because they're unsure of where to turn or who to talk to, because I suppose unless you've had this kind of conversation with someone before, you don't know their experience. You don't know if they're going to be open-minded to what you're going to talk about. And there is still quite a lot of stigma around it, or people say that they're willing to talk about it, but they don't really know what to say back that's going to be comforting. I think that was part of the reason it took me so long to talk about my eating disorder, because there is so much shame associated and also a lot of judgment, or you feel that and you don't know what's going to come as a response. I think for people who are scared to reach out, I always encourage them to talk to someone that they do feel safe with. So if it was at work, I would say probably a colleague, and maybe together they can help you find someone to go to the next level. Because I think it can be really daunting if you're reaching out to someone who you see as being, much higher above you or that kind of thing. So I think reaching out to someone who's on a similar level to you, or someone that you feel safe with, I think that's one of the most important things, making sure that you feel safe to be vulnerable, because it is really scary.
And I know psychological safety is something that we'll discuss throughout this, but Kim, for someone who's maybe not familiar with psychological safety, would you like to maybe sort of paint a picture about why that's so important of having that environment, just as some context before we get into the rest of the conversation?
Yeah, so what we know is that the brain is wired to be better able to deal with emotions. And when we experience emotion, it's connected to the limbic part of the brain. And if that becomes over aroused, it's taking resources from the front part of our brain, from the frontal lobe. And we don't want that to happen, because our frontal lobe helps us think rationally, make good decisions, and be very productive. And the limbic system fires more rapidly when we perceive danger in our workplace. And the danger these days is not about a bear kind of walking into camp and perhaps taking someone. You know, we can perceive danger if we think that our job is insecure, or we don't understand the value of our work, or we're feeling disconnected and not part of the social group. And so what we want to do is to build a positive team culture, or team climate. That's really important. In fact, it's the strongest predictor of what we call psychological safety, which is where people in organisations feel that they are supported, that they're looked after, that their contributions matter. And so how do we build a positive team climate and that psychological safety? Well, I think that needs to be role modelled from the top. You know, we need organisations to recognise that mental health is everyone's responsibility. And we want people to feel safe, to be able to talk, just as Olivia spoke about then, to talk up about mental health. And we need it to be visible. We need to see that the organisation is thinking about, in all the ways that they do business, how we can bring in mental health issues and make this very visible for people in the workplace. So there are some strategies that I can talk about later about for people to take away, or tips that you can do to help this kind of feeling of psychological safety and positive team climate.
And if you do get questions, or if you have questions from some of the things that we're speaking about, please feel free to put them in the Q&A channel. And if there's any comments that you have throughout, please feel free to just post that in the chat. And we do have members of the United Project here who'll do their best to answer some of your questions as we go. But and thank you for sharing that context, Kim. So I know one of the things that you mentioned, Olivia, that really I guess resonated with me, and I guess because I had the opposite experience, was like knowing who to reach out to in a work setting, or like who is the right person to reach out to. And I know that when I think I was 21 years old, and I was working remotely in my first full-time job. I was up in northern Queensland. I was working in the public government system, and I was a graduate in the HR graduate program for Queensland Health, and I was working remote, and I was away from my family. And you know, my father about 12 months earlier had started suffering from severe depression, and had attempted his life for the first time, and had lost his job. And there was a lot of change that was happening in my life. And I remember, rather than like, I didn't feel comfortable talking to a colleague, or I didn't reach back out to my family, because a lot of this was happening inside of my family. And I reached out to our EAP program, and I didn't get the help that I needed. And it was really hard. Like I like poured my like heart and soul out on the phone, and I'm like, you know, this is the right number to call. This is what work said. Like, you know, if you're struggling, like call this number. And I called, and like the response I got after sharing all these things was, yeah, mate, that sounds pretty rough. And I'm like, yeah, I know, like I need help. And like, I didn't get it. And I feel lucky that I knew to ask for help again, and that didn't discourage me after like having that sort of first knockback of like when I needed help and support, that I didn't get it. And so like, I think one of the biggest takeaways here is, when you're feeling these things, obviously the first conversation you have is with yourself. But if you do have that trust and that safety, if you have a team environment where, you know, leadership is showcasing that you're allowed to talk about things that impact your work, that is not your work, because all of these things that we're talking about are impacting our ability to be humans in the workplace. But if you have a family member, if you have a friend, if you have some of those resources we shared, just like, yeah, if you're feeling scared to reach out and ask for help, like please do. And even if you get knocked back, like please keep asking, and like find like a place to do it. Because yeah, my first experience in trying to ask for help in the workplace didn't go how I wanted, but I'm glad I still kept reaching out and getting support. So before we kind of get into more of, I guess, the kind of, you know, what happens at the organizational level to create a mentally healthy workplace, what can we do from a team perspective, which is one of the most common environments we find ourselves in, as well as individuals, just as humans, what can we do? You know, I thought it was important to maybe set some context with some data that's out there. And as an Australian in America, I say data and data, and I actually don't even know what's what anymore. I don't know which one's right or wrong. So you're just going to have to have to deal with that. So data and data, depending on where you're listening. But when you signed up for this event, you might have seen that there was some data that we put on the website, which was Australian based. But I just wanted to call it out here because, you know, it really stood out to me. So 3 in 5 workers experienced a mental health condition over the past 12 months. The second piece was that mental health concerns were the most common reason for lower productivity, yet some workers found, you know, all the things that we had to work through in 2020 actually made them more productive. And then at a national Australian level, more than half of workers report that no action is being taken from their perspective in the workplace to actually address mental health. So we're seeing mental health case rises. We're seeing that it's becoming more, you know, prominent. We're seeing that more people are addressing it. But we're also seeing that like maybe companies haven't responded in the same way that you know, their employees need them to. So when I looked at that, a couple of things really stood out to me. So like, you know, if you were on a team, if you're listening to this right now, if you're on a team right now that has 2 or more employees, you know, there's a chance that someone right now is experiencing a mental health condition on your team that you might not know about. The second thing that stood out to me was that our mental health is impacting our ability to be productive. Yet a lot of the research that we're seeing has shown that people are working more than ever. So we're actually trying to be more productive, yet our ability to maybe be productive is changing. And then that companies and leadership need to play a significant role in taking action and providing support for their employees' mental health. So, you know, when I shared that story earlier, there was an EAP, but like I know a lot of companies are now actually doing a lot more when it comes to providing resources from, you know, providing therapy, from providing coaching, from providing, you know, really specific ways that you can help your employees. So, Kim, as I shared some of those and some of those pieces of data as well as those conclusions, what did you see from that data? Like, were my conclusions similar to the things that stood out to you, or is there other pieces of research that you think is really important for us to be considering right now when we talk about mental health in the workplace?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing personally is that a lot of organisations and team leaders are reaching out and saying, hey, we want to learn more about mental health. And for some people, it's still, what is it? For some, it's, well, how do we recognise if people might need support? And for others, it's, okay, we recognise it, but how do we have the conversation? And there's still an idea around, well, if I say something to someone, I might make it worse for them. So I think it's really good that we're seeing more people reaching out. I'm also noticing on one-on-one coaching that a lot of people now are talking about their own personal mental health issues or concerns that they have about employees or friends or colleagues or friends or family. And it's becoming very intertwined. So it's no longer just workplace coaching. You know, it's both personal lives and work lives we know are enmeshed, and even more so after COVID. So, or still we're going through COVID, and questions about how do we support people when they are working remotely. So we know that, you know, according to research by Deloitte, for example, employee mental health initiatives are more effective when they're designed to build employee resilience. So I think that's really important, that we kind of look at ways that we can build resilience. I work with the United Project, and we have a Team United development program as a part of that. And that's group coaching, which is aimed at raising awareness of mental health issues, but also teaching strategies to build resilience. You know, one thing that I hear a lot of people talk about is having a lack of confidence, about this kind of demon that's talking in your ear, you know, you're making a fool of yourself, you don't know what you're talking about, or people don't like you. And so we look at challenging some of those thoughts in this program. So we hold on to beliefs that we just assume are factual, but a lot of the beliefs that we have, for example, it might be, I can't trust anyone, you know, I can't talk to anyone. A lot of those beliefs are not actually factual. So we teach people to recognize these unhealthy thoughts that are going on based on these beliefs, to challenge them and to reframe them, so we can kind of have a healthier take on these things.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I know one of the tools, or I guess all the tips that I kind of learned was when I went through this leadership coaching program, And it was to do with like a lot of how we experience the workplace and how self-critical we can be on ourselves is because we tell ourselves a story about like how we showed up. So like I might tell myself a story like, I'm really nervous on this call, or I'm afraid I won't answer all the right questions, or like maybe we'll run out of time. And I'm telling myself all these stories. And the tip that I was told was, if you were to replay back like the last hour, if I was to watch this webinar and a video camera recorded the whole thing, what was true? Well, what was true was I was standing here, I presented, I spoke, I asked questions, we had a conversation, people were online, as opposed to everything else that I was worried about, which is just stories I'm telling myself versus what was actually factually true. What's factually true is the four of us are having a conversation right now. You know, that is a fact.
Yeah, and what you're able to do there, Damon, is you're engaging the frontal lobe again. So I was talking about the limbic system, that's the emotional part. I'm not doing a great job, I look silly. But when you're able to be rational about it, engage this part of the brain, then you're able to go, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I wasn't appearing that way to the whole audience. And even if I was, you know, that's okay. It's normal. It's fine to be a little anxious. It shows that I care. So being able to engage this part and calm the emotional part of the brain is really important. And that's what team leaders can do through these programs, is help people learn how to manage emotions better, and also to help create calm, supportive organizational environments for people to work within.
So we've got plenty of great questions coming in, as well as some comments. So please feel free to keep posting them. We do have some members of the team trying to type some responses, and I'm also multitasking, reading it all to see how I can factor it into some of the questions that I've already written. But I guess as we kind of shift gears from like looking at this at like, you know, we're all individuals and humans, but we're a part of different contexts, and the context that we're talking about here is the organization. You know, like for me personally, I think it's really important that the organization supports through resources, through funding for mental health programs, for creating access to things like coaching and therapy, you know, if there's budget for it, but also by like talking about like demonstrated behaviors that are healthy and that they want to promote, and talking about that at the leadership level, saying that like we want people to be open to talk about these things. We're going to train our leaders in how to have conversations about mental health in the workplace. We want you to feel comfortable about reaching out and talking about these things. I think, you know, a culture first organization from 24 months ago might have already had some of these programs in place. I think a lot of this has been accelerated now because of what we've all had to work through over the past 12 months, where, you know, it's just, we know that more people are like under pressure. We know that stress is increasing, and that our, you know, ability to be resilient, while we might be acknowledging that it's getting more important to be resilient, it doesn't mean that we already have the tools and resources to actually be resilient. So I think mirroring it at the organizational level, having leadership talk about it, but so much of what we experience in the workplace happens at the team level. That's why there's been so many studies about teams, what makes for effective teams, or what makes for psychologically safe teams. So as we kind of shift gears, Andrew, I'd love to really bring you to the sort of front and center of this conversation and talk specifically just around empathetic leadership, and like, what do you sort of think about when you think about, you know, creating a mentally healthy team dynamic?
Thanks, Damon. Look, I think one of the things that's really profound at the moment, and it came up in one of the questions on the chat, that, you know, employee experiences and the way of working has dramatically changed. And the feedback I'm getting from my clients is that, you know, as people are working more remotely, how do they check in? Because what they're finding is that the incidence around mental health is increasing, but their ability to detect that is much harder because they can't see some of the signals that we might see if someone's in the workplace there. So, you know, Kim talked about the importance of psychological safety, and I did some research with a colleague last year around, you know, the impact of COVID-19 on teams and how teams work and their level of purpose, etc. And what we found in that was that teams that were very highly productive and high performing, one of the things that really stood out was that they were socially connected. It went through the roof. And so that sense of, you know, if I think about psychological safety, I think about this concept of intentional connection. An intentional connection to me is where you create the time and space to purposely engage with an individual or individuals to connect at that human or relational level. And so I think one of the things from an empathetic leadership point of view, but this is not necessarily up to the leader. I talk a lot about in my work leadership density and how do you build that that everyone can actually do this intentional connection. And so, you know, that's why I asked you the question earlier, how are you feeling? Because I think what we end up doing in organisations, because we're so busy, that we're very good at connecting at a task level. So let's talk about that report. Let's talk about that activity. And some of the work I'm trying to do with my clients to build their psychological safety is to really ramp up this intentional connection. And it might be as simple as, you know, at the start of having a conversation with a colleague, is that you simply ask them how they're feeling. Or you ask them, you know, what's energizing you at the moment, or what's sapping your energy. But it's shifting from a mindset of you're a resource, we're here to get a task done, to actually you're a human and I want to connect with you in a human way. And I think that has two advantages from a mentally healthier organisation. Firstly, I think it raises our ability to detect, and that becomes obvious if you're asking those questions and people say, you know, I'm feeling a bit flat at the moment, or I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, then we can dig a bit deeper and we can start to see and have the conversation around it. So I think that it improves our detection. And I think the second thing that it does is it starts to, and I said this at the start, and you know, this is really important for me, is that it starts to normalise the conversation around mental health, because those conversations start to emerge organically. And it goes back to something you said very early on, that, you know, conversations can change our life. And if we are able to have those conversations with individuals and within our team, then that can create an environment where people feel safe enough to go, actually, I'm not okay. And, you know, I know we have in Australia, we have, are you okay? But I want to sort of see if we shift it to, it's okay. It's okay to talk about our mental health. And particularly for a male, and I, having experienced mental health challenges in the past, about 15 years ago, so I can really empathise with the stories I've heard so far. As a male, it was incredibly hard to find who I could reach out to. And I if, you know, if we can change the dial and create an environment where both men and women can just talk about it in a way that feels like it's as normal as talking about physical health.
I'm keeping an eye on some of the questions and just try, because I think we're getting pretty tactical here, which is important, because a lot of people are asking questions around, like, you know, what can I do? What should I be doing for my team? What do I need to be doing? You know, if you're in the HR profession, and I know it looks like Raquel, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asked, you know, if a workplace has all the right systems, tools, and open culture to support people with mental wellness, but people are just not okay in the light of the ongoing, you know, pandemic, how do you suggest that we support, and like, what is our place? And I think, you know, the structure can be there, the framework can be there, the resources can be there, but I think, and that's why I wanted to frame this from like individual, team, and company. Like, the individual needs to be in an environment where they can reach out and know who to ask for. And I think some of the things you were saying, Andrew, really prompted me for some tactical things that we can all be doing. So like, my colleague Mel posted something about mental health first aid, which is a certificate that individuals can do in Australia. So like, you can actually train up and become certified in mental health first aid. And then I'd go, and that was something that I've done in the past. But at the organizational level, one thing that you could do to kind of take it to the next level is it's great that some of these people might be training in how to have these conversations. You then, and this is where my HR and marketing brain comes together, you need to market that people have these skills in the workplace. You need to say that, like, hey, like, did you know that we have 15 people who have the mental health first aid certificate in our workplace? If you ever want to know who to talk to, here are some of these people who are actually trained in this that you can talk to. And just like repeating that often enough that when someone finds themselves on that day going, I think I want to talk to someone about this, but then like, you know, so they know who to reach out to, that they know that these resources are there. So I think that was one. And then the other one that you mentioned, Andrew, when you sort of asked me, like, you know, how am I doing? While I've been interviewing sort of different guests on the Culture First podcast, there's been this little moment that I've kind of sort of branded, which is what I call the like double click question. And it's where you ask one of those questions and you try to see whether someone's given you a behavioral response. So, you know, if I was to say, Olivia, how are you going today? Maybe your behavioral response might be pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. How are you? And we just kind of like go back into the, like, we just reflex out, as opposed to me saying, and no, I'm going to ask you again, like, how are you really going? And basically what I kind of called that was like, sometimes we need to hear a question twice to have permission to answer it once, because we don't even ask ourselves that question enough. Like, how am I feeling today? Have I checked in? What am I grateful for? How is my mental health been? So, you know, for some of those people who say like, I really feel like one of my team members is struggling, but every time I ask them, how are you going? I just get the same response. You know, maybe open up and go, like, ask them a second time and just say like, hey, like, I want to let you know, I'm here to create a space for you, you know, if you want to have that conversation. So
Damon,
yeah.
sorry, can I just chime in there, because it's
Of course.
everything what you're saying at the moment. Sometimes people will just respond with, yeah, I'm good, you know, because that's what's expected socially. The way that we can get people to open up is to have some rapport that we have built up between colleagues, if we're talking about the workplace. And Olivia was talking about that as well, talking to people she feels comfortable with, like a friend or someone she trusts. And the way that you build that kind of trust or rapport with people is to spend some time, what we refer to as putting deposits in an emotional piggy bank. And some kids talk about it as having a bucket and filling the bucket. It's the same concept. So every time that you recognize when an employee has done a good job, when you provide positive feedback and praise, when you do an act of kindness, when you remember something that they told you that's personal, you know, they're in a concert on the weekend, and then on Monday you say, hey, how did the concert go? Right? You're putting deposits in their emotional piggy bank. And that makes it easier for people to be able to say to you when they need to kind of feel like, you know, that there might be some problems there or some issues they need to talk about. They're better able to disclose those because the piggy bank has been filled up already.
It's like someone just also posted that Brené Brown, because we cannot be on any webinar, session, or podcast in the people and culture space if Brené Brown does not get mentioned once. That is actually a real written down rule about speaking about any of these topics. I have seen it from when you sign up to be a thought leader in this space, everyone must mention Brené Brown at least once. But she calls it a marble jar moment. And, you know, another thing that I've taken a lot from Brené Brown's work is that, you know, one of the best ways to actually increase trust inside of your workplace is to lead with vulnerability. And, you know, to be okay with actually being vulnerable yourself first, to mirror that behavior, to showcase that other people can also, you know, do that in front of you. And I had absolutely no, was not planning on sharing some of this, but like last year, you know, I co-founded a men's mental health charity to kind of help process some of the things that, you know, happened to my dad. I spent a lot of time on stigma reduction. But it also took me knowing all these things were true, all these things were important. It took me like a decade to actually go see a therapist, to go talk about some of these things and to actually open up about it. And what I realized is once I did that, once I went out and seeked some of that help and, like, you know, dealt with some of that past trauma and helped me process some of the things that were coming up last year, I started talking about that to other people. And I'm like, oh, you're actually just letting you know, like, I can't take a meeting at 5 p.m. because that's when I see my therapist. And they're like, oh, you're seeing a therapist. And then it was like, oh, that's really great. But then the questions were like, how did you find one? You know, like, where can I, like, well, what do you do? And then like people start asking, like, how do you find a good one? And like, you know, like what are the benefits? And what I realized was I was like slowly but surely normalizing that conversation inside of my team, inside of the wider culture amp practice that I was part of. And then like my boss was like, I haven't seen one for 5 years, but like you talking about this prompted me to go see one. And before, all these little like ripple effects started happening, are just about me sort of talking about this. So, for someone who literally co-founded a charity, the men's mental health space, it took me a decade to actually reach out and ask for help. And that is sometimes all it takes is one person to another person, and you just start normalizing that conversation. And I know when I interviewed Esther Perel, one of the most common questions that she gets and that people ask her is, how do I find a good therapist? Who do I reach out to? And hopefully these are some of the conversations that we can also be normalizing in the workplace. There was another question that I wanted to address about, like, how do we look out for team members who might be showing signs that they might be suffering from mental health, or their mental health might be, going through a bit of a dip. And then, so these are some of the signs that I've sort of, done some research into, but I'd love to hear if there's others, but some that I want to mention here. Maybe they start missing deadlines, or there might be a lack of follow-up, or maybe like meetings that they used to attend, they just start dropping off from, for no reason. There could be decreased responsiveness to communication, or maybe they just don't like answer the question how they're doing. Maybe in some of those more connection-based meetings, where conversation just flows a little bit more free-flowing and it's not about a task. Maybe they don't go off mute or turn their camera on as much. And I must say, normalizing turning your camera off is a good thing. We don't all need to be staring at ourselves all day, every day. It's not natural. But like maybe you pick up on things like that. And also just maybe an increase in, whether they become a bit more irritable, or if they're always, feeling like a little bit more on edge. So some of these things don't always mean that like someone needs to go seek help, but they just might be signs that their resilience is dropping, or that they're like some other things are going on. So I'm curious if there's other things that anyone on the call has sort of picked up on. Please feel free to put them in the chat, or if there's anyone here, like what are some other signs that potentially we should be looking out for at the team level?
I think a common one is, a common one is maladaptive coping strategies. So people start to drink more, drugs, they're not sleeping well, some things. And the other thing to look out for are changes. So if there's someone who hasn't spoken up much in meetings ever, that's not a change. But if we're starting to see changes in how people interact and how they show up at work, then that is a flag as well. Sorry, Andrew.
I think a couple for me, Damon, is seeing people withdraw. I think, being a bit more aloof, being a bit more independent, not as collegiate. I think that's a bit of a telltale sign. Particularly if they're normally collegiate, to go to what Kim's saying about a change. And the other one, and I know this from, from my own dealings, when I was experiencing anxiety and working at the same time, the feedback that I probably got was, I was more direct than usual. And that really stuck with me, because if we see someone being a bit more abrupt, a bit more direct, extroverting their anxiety, I think that's a bit of a telltale sign that maybe something is going on beneath the surface there. So they're two things from my perspective.
I'd like to hear from Olivia.
Sorry, you go.
I'd like to hear from you, Olivia.
Yeah, well, when I was going through my personal experience, there was a whole lot of that withdrawing. I was avoiding social situations. I mean, a lot of that was connected to my eating habits as well, because I didn't want to be eating in front of people. I, was skipping meals and all of that. So I was avoiding lunch times. I was avoiding so many situations. And I think that is one of the biggest signs, is withdrawing and sort of turning into themselves. But I was definitely similar to you, Andrew. I'd say more direct, but probably more snappy and a bit more irritable. Talking less, but when I did, I probably wasn't that nice to be around.
Yeah.
Kim, did you have a follow-up point to that, or?
No.
No. So I'm having a check at some of the comments, as well as some of the questions here. So please feel free to sort of keep posting them, and I'll try to get to some of those towards the end of this conversation. But, I think one of the things that has sort of been woven throughout this conversation so far is, there's things that happen at the team level, there's things that happen at the organizational level, but also just like at the individual level. What can we do? How do we have these conversations? So Olivia, I'd love to maybe hear, like, has the fact that you've been so open and public about, your own struggles with your mental illness, how have you seen the conversations change in your industry, particularly as a model? And, have you seen that you speaking openly has allowed other people to talk about it? Do you see that kind of, ripple effect like I talked about when I was talking about me talking, just with my own team about seeing a therapist?
Yeah, definitely. Every day, I think I don't think their day goes by where I don't have some sort of interaction talking about mental health in some capacity. Yesterday, I was with a group of people in the industry, and pretty early on, we started having this conversation because I think it was similar to what you were saying before. You sort of say, how are you? And you respond very automatically. But as you move a little bit deeper and you share a vulnerability, then it's more likely that the other person will do that. And I said, I've had a really busy week, which is great, but it's also maybe a bit anxious. And so then 3 more people said, oh yeah, I've been feeling really anxious too. And, transitioning back to normal life has had its pros and cons, and it's been overwhelming. And yeah, I think it really has that domino effect. And it's amazing to actually see it happening before your eyes. And then I think on social media too, particularly when I talk about my eating disorder, because I do think that is one that people really avoid talking about, like I did myself. People will tell me that, they might not have spoken to their best friend or their mum, but they will tell me, which can be a lot to take on, but at least they're sort of starting to talk about it and I think taking that first step. So yeah, it is really powerful.
I guess as a follow-up to that, it takes, like I said, so much courage to have that conversation with yourself and then to talk to others to seek help. But now so many people are turning to you and asking for support. And I think in organizations, we also need to be careful that for these people who are actively talking about it, that if everyone's coming to them, maybe they start to feel some of that, I guess, burden that all these people are coming to them like, I don't have all the answers and I don't know how to support you. So how are you supporting yourself and your own mental health, knowing that so many people are coming to you for support?
I always preface conversations by saying I'm not an expert, because I'm not. I can only talk to my experience. I like to lead others, into different areas as to where they can go. And I also explain how I had support and where I got that and where I continue to get that. So I see a psychologist regularly, like you do as well. And then also talk about the things that I do to maintain my mental health. And yeah, setting boundaries is a big part of that. And yeah, making sure that I'm not taking on what people are telling me. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's making sure I'm getting plenty of sleep, exercising regularly, eating nutritious meals and doing that regularly so I don't fall into old habits with my eating. There's just sort of these, I suppose, maintenance behaviors that I have to keep doing. And I know that I'm so aware of that and aware of my triggers too. So I can share that with people and hopefully that helps them to, take some part of that and then move on and get some help themselves. But yeah, I definitely don't try and solve their problems because I can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think always, that's why I'm posting all those resources at the start of this webinar, saying we're here to have this conversation because we're trying to normalize this conversation and find ways to give tips and support, but also, it's important to go seek out medical professionals and make sure. And I think one of the comments that came in, or one of the questions that came in, was when someone gets contradictory support. So maybe, an organization says one thing, but then your boss says something else. So I'm not sure if Kim or Andrew, if you've had any kind of insights into how companies and managers can support without potentially giving contradictory advice to their employees.
I think the obvious one is just to have mental health training that everybody attends, so everyone's on the same page. There's opportunity to do some role modeling. There's opportunity for one-on-one coaching if there's allowances for that, but making sure that everybody is talking using the same language.
Yeah, and I think this is an intent. We are starting to have the conversations now, but I know in 10 years' time, mental health will be a key cultural thing and how organisations deal with it. And I can imagine how challenging it is that if you've got a really supportive boss, but the culture of the organisation gives contradictory information, that's incredibly difficult. But I think we're at the start of the journey. I think part of our role is to raise this as part of a cultural reset that mental health is really important.
When we think about the individual as well, one of the things I wanted to sort of bring up is that, like, you know, we can think about it from our own perspective. What can I do? What training can I do? How do I support my team? But we can also be like laser focused on the experience of an individual or a group of individuals inside of the company. So one thing that I wanted to surface here was, you know, when I think about people and culture research, like I've worked in this space for a long time, I don't always just try to look for the same sort of studies or the same types of inspiration. I try to go out far and wide to work out some other ways to like tell stories that inspire. And one of the people that I interviewed on the Culture First podcast was Cleo Wade, and she's a poet. She's you know, she writes these really incredible pieces of poetry online. And when I was speaking to her about community building and just like how do we actually have a positive impact in the world, the story that she shared with me continues to impact how I think about the workplace. Because, you know, she said when she asked herself the question, how do I be a better member of society? The question is like huge. Like, what can I do to like save the environment and save all these things? Like, but then she said she can take it back down to just very tangible things. She goes, you know, well, today I can wake up and be a better daughter. Today I can wake up and be a better sister. Today I can wake up and be a better advocate for other women. And when you get laser focused on someone's experience and what you can do to impact it, we can actually start having some of these positive ripple effects. And one of the, you know, types of individuals that I think we should be really focused on right now in the workplace is early career professionals. So, you know, here in the US, we're about to, you know, go into 12 months worth of working remotely or distributed or a hybrid workforce. You know, early career professionals, you know, used to spend upwards of 40 hours in the office getting community, learning through osmosis, getting connection, getting access to skip level mentorship, being around different types of people to learn and grow and get those connections that they need to focus on, like, what do I want to be and how do I grow and what are some opportunities? Right now, when we're all in these little virtual boxes, you're not getting some of that osmosis. You're not getting some of that more personal connection, you know, unless a company's really intentional about building some of that connection into the company and the culture and being really specific about it. These early career professionals are, you know, losing out on some of that stuff. So if you want to really focus on how do we create a mentally healthy workplace at the individual level, we can also tailor some of our programs really specifically, just saying like, hey, who in our workforce right now is in the first 3 years or in their first or second job, because they're going to be having a really different experience. Some of them might have, you know, moved back to their parents' house, which, you know, comes with its own kind of level of, I guess, you know, it can be testing, it can, you know, for many different reasons. So when I think about the individual, yes, we can all do something, but I also encourage everyone to think about individuals in their workplace and say, what could I do this week to create a more mentally healthy workplace for a type of employee, whether it's a level, whether it's an early career professional, or whether it's someone within your workplace. So that was just something that was bubbling up for me. As we get closer to time, I wanted to kind of maybe focus a little bit more on actionable things that, you know, Kim and Andrew, that you're doing for yourself, or actionable things that you encourage others to do. So Kim, I guess the question that I also asked Olivia is like, you know, how are you supporting and looking after yourself these days, and what advice do you have to everyone on the call?
Okay, yeah, a couple of things. Firstly, I really liked what Olivia said about looking after yourself physically. I think that's really, really important. We recognise that, you know, there's research around the 5 things that we can do to ensure that we have positive mental health. And there are things like being active. So we know that physical exercise actually releases chemicals in the brain that make us feel good, more energized, more motivated. So even just getting out at lunchtime, going for a walk, it doesn't have to be high impact exercise. And organisations and team leaders can help people do that by ensuring they take breaks from lunch, having walking meetings and things like that. But also a lot of research now about the importance of sleep and how detrimental it is if we don't get our 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and healthy eating. So I think all of those things are really important things we can do at an individual level. The other thing I would finish off with is the importance of gratitude. And the reason I love gratitude is that the benefits are huge. We know that when people practice gratitude, they're happier, they have better sleep, better relationships. They can show more empathy to others. And it's free, and it's something that we can implement immediately, and everyone can do it. And you know, what we're doing when we are recognizing when people are doing something that we can be grateful for is we're building resilience not only in ourselves, but in others. So if you think about when someone has given you a piece of praise or, shown appreciation or gratitude for something, that people can carry that all day and sometimes all week. It's very powerful. But when you're practicing gratitude, you're also rewiring your brain. It's just like when you have a new car and suddenly you see that same car on the road everywhere. The same thing with gratitude. When you're recognizing the positive things in your environment, you're priming your brain to keep seeing all the positives. So it's building resilience in yourself and others. So I really encourage everyone on the call to, find moments in the day that you can appreciate someone and show real gratitude. And it works best when it's genuine, it's unexpected. The recipient's not expecting it, and it's specific. So not just, hey, great job today, but Olivia, I really appreciate how you shared your personal story today and allowed others to be able to learn from the courageous paths that you've taken so far.
Specific feedback. Yep, definitely. And if the rule of thought leadership in the people and culture space is Brené Brown must be mentioned at least once per session, the other one is Damon must mention a podcast episode every 10 minutes. So what that reminded me of is a podcast episode I did with Claude Silver, who's the chief heart officer at VaynerMedia. And when I think, when you're talking about the more you recognize something in yourself, the more you'll see it in others. And like she calls that the spot it, you got it. So like if you're an empathetic leader, like if you've got it, like you spot it more. And then you start building up this behavioral muscle around like spot it, you got it is like how we think about what we actually, prioritize in the workplace. Because at the end of the day, a company's mission and vision is operationalized through their culture and their values. And the culture and values are a summary of the behaviors that you want to be promoting inside of your company on any given day to get to that mission and vision. And you need to be really like specific around here's the things that, here's how we work at this company. And then you start talking about it so often that it's easy to spot it. And you're like, wow, when people give feedback, they're really specific and they tell me why I've had an impact. And they're empathetic when, I'm having, if I haven't checked out of that meeting or I've turned my video off. And you need to just create that muscle so that it becomes a part of your operating system as a company. So as we get close to wrapping up and we have one big ask of all of you at the end, Andrew, how are you working on your mental health and what final advice do you have for the audience?
I would say ditto to everything that Kim said. I'm a runner, so I make sure I run 5 or 6 days a week, and to me that has the biggest impact on my mental health. But one thing I think 3 years ago, and very quickly, is I learned how important self-care was. So now every evening I look back over my day and make sure that I've had one moment of self-care in my day. And it could be a healthy meal, it could be a great sleep, it could be a run, it could be any of those things. And the other thing I found this year, and this is for the audience, there's a great app that I use now that tracks my mood called Dailyo. Takes 1 minute every day and it tracks your mood and your inputs into that. So I can see for me when my mood has dropped, I can see, okay, my sleeping patterns have changed. I may be drinking more. I'm not running as much, whatever it is. But it's as the Americans say, it's data. And I can use that to shift and make some changes there. And I would highly recommend it. To me, it's been brilliant change for me to practice self-care.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm keeping an eye on a question that Pete just said, and he's talking about grief and loss and how do we talk about that in the workplace. I'll give a quick little plug. There's actually a Culture First chapter event about grief and loss that is running, I think, next week. So if you head to culturefirst.com, you can head there. And then also compassion fatigue is one of the topics that I've talked about on the Culture First podcast, and especially with people in the legal profession, nursing, or support workers. And one of the big takeaways for me from that is, like, sometimes when we're too in it, we don't even have the capacity to put on our own, life vest first. A lot of people say, put on your own life vest, then help others. Sometimes when we're too in it and when we're really experiencing things, we don't even have the energy or the acknowledgement to do that. So that's why we need people who can spot these things, help us and support us. And then the final little takeaway before we wrap up, and Olivia, when we spoke before this call, I said, what would make this event a raging success for you? And you had something really specific that you wanted, I guess, the audience to do after we wrap up. So what was that?
Yeah, definitely. I would love if anyone who's actually been in this chat to go away and start a conversation with someone. And I think, you know, it would have that ripple effect from today to talk about mental health, be open and discuss what they're doing to stay on top of their mental health. I think we've all done our job well if that happens.
Amazing. So thank you to all of you for sharing your stories, for sharing your advice, and for being part of this conversation with me. Like I said, conversations like this can help change people's lives. And I hope that people have found actionable things that they can do for their team, inside of their company, as well as for themselves. So this is just the start of an ongoing conversation. There's plenty of resources that, we'll continue to post about. But yeah, just please go have this conversation with someone else. You just don't know who might need to hear it today. So thank you for joining us. If there's any other things, please feel free to reach out to all of us here. Please vote on that poll on my LinkedIn. Would love to see more people be able to talk about mental health. And thanks so much for tuning into this dual event between Culture Amp and the United Project. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.